When I posted my $20 laptop video, I never expected it to get more than 1 million views. Along with those views came a lot of comments, and many of you asked that I do videos on both desktops shown in that video. I thought it'd be another fun little project to try to get my nearly 20-year-old desktop working again, so while I don't pretend I'll be doing anything useful with it, join me as I try to get it up and running again and then go on another quick nostalgia trip to show you the hardware inside and the history of this machine. This was my first home-built machine and the computer that taught me everything I know about modern PC architecture, but technically it started out life very differently. Believe it or not, it was originally a Packard Bell Legend 2000 multimedia, my first ever IBM PC-compatible computer purchased in 1993. Prior to that, I'd used an Apple IIc since 1984. You can see that machine in an earlier video I did about the Apple II. My Packard Bell was a 486 SX25 with 4 megs of RAM and a 170 meg hard drive, and it was a piece of junk. So over the years I ripped its guts apart and eventually replaced every single component in it several times over, including the case. What I ended up with was this. The final piece from the Packard Bell to go was its beige floppy drive, because clearly that didn't match the ultra-cool 1990s silver and black aesthetic. Let's try turning this thing on. So here's my computer just on the floor of one of my bedrooms as I try and get it working again. I've had to have it hooked up to one of my TVs, which is the only device that I have that still accepts a VGA input. Hey, it works! In the interests of full disclosure, I did have to reinstall Windows to get it to this point. When I decommissioned this computer, I had wiped the drive and marked it for the trash, which I never quite got around to. So this week I dumped a fresh install of Windows XP on the drive. That's the OS that I last used on it. Just for fun, let's take a look at some quick benchmarks. I pretty much have to use period-correct benchmarks because modern ones just won't even run, but it did pretty well on 3D Mark 01 and 03, for example. I also tried PC Mark 2002, though I didn't have the Pro Pack installed, and I have no idea if this number is affected by that. As you might expect, with at least a competent 3D graphics card inside and a slightly more modern CPU, it can run basically all the same games my $20 ThinkPad 600X could, although it does have a strange problem with close combat. I swear to God I remember running this game on Windows XP, but it doesn't seem to run on this machine. I just want to point out here that these machines were both current in my household at the same time. I had my original 600X at the same time as this desktop, although admittedly there was probably a GeForce 2 inside this thing at that point instead of the GeForce 4 that's in it right now. But in those days especially, desktops were just miles ahead of laptops. Today, while they're not yet equals, they are a lot closer in performance. Let's just get in there and tear this thing down. Keep in mind that this was the last configuration I had installed, not the first, so some parts may seem more modern than you'd expect. I was just continuously upgrading this computer from around 1995 through 2002. This was actually in the first wave of toolless case designs, so it just has the thumb screws here. My previous white case that I had for this computer did require a screwdriver to get into, so this was a lot more convenient. The side panel just slides off. That was also kind of a new innovation, and in order to get in here, I actually have to disconnect these two fans, which is kind of annoying, but there we go. We are in. Now, around this time is when computers started becoming powerful enough to require really a lot of fans, and the fans at that time were all 80mm. They were generally quite loud and whiny, and a little cottage industry with this company, Akasa, at the forefront of it, had started up with this acoustic material that was actually kind of like soundproofing for your PC. And I can't say it worked all that well. It worked maybe a little bit. But I have this stuff all over this machine. You'll see it inside when we look inside too. By the way, the fans themselves are, I have no idea what brand. They're just probably some kind of off-brand blue LED fan, 80mm fan that was available at the time. The case itself is also just a cheap Chinese kind of rip-off of a Lian Li case, which were sort of the standard bearers at that time as well. So here is just kind of an overview of the inside of the case. I'm going to go through each component one by one as I remove them, but I just wanted to give you sort of an overall look. And yes, it is quite messy, I realize that. Cable management at that time was not really a thing, so don't jump down my throat if you're building systems today and you're used to nice, clean looking, beautiful insides. We didn't really look at the inside of the case in those days. So even just some of the kind of visual upgrades, like this orange fan here, was kind of a new idea at that time, and this nice Thermaltake fan grill. So yeah, I'll just go through some of the items here now, and I'm gonna sort of reset the camera, reset the computer, and I'm just gonna start taking things out. Okay, so here we have a closer look at the inside of the computer. I really can't tell you what this motherboard is at this point. I don't remember. I will take that out last, but let's just try ripping stuff out of here now, and I'll go through what each one of these things is. So here's my graphics card, the last one that I had several graphics cards in this thing. This one I would have bought around 2002. It's probably the last thing I put in this machine. It is a GeForce 4 Ti 4200. These were kind of the sweet spot in terms of price performance at that time. One thing that I look for when I build or upgrade computers is bang for the buck. I don't generally go for the top end equipment. You get diminishing returns once you start getting into the real high-end stuff. This card gave about probably 95% of a Ti 4400, about 90% of a Ti 4600, and cost about half the price. So this was a great card at the time. It's an AGP card, as you can see, and VGA only, which I kind of regret now, but yeah, that also made it a little bit cheaper. For sound, I was using a Sound Blaster Live 5.1 digital, and this is the OEM version of the card. I don't believe this is retail. The retail ones looked a little bit different. This is typically one that you would have gotten bundled with a system. This is a mostly software-based card. Obviously, it does have its own DSP, but the actual samples would be stored on your PC and accessed through the PCI bus. The PCI bus made that possible. So it wasn't a bad card, and it did have digital output, which I needed as I was connecting to a 5.1 setup. So not a bad card, but not a really high-end one either, obviously. Well, that was difficult. Lastly, we have the network card. Back in those days, computer motherboards typically did not come with a either wired or wireless Ethernet on board. So this is actually a wired Ethernet card in here. This would have been around the time that motherboards started phasing that in on board. So this is probably the last period of time when you would have needed one of these. And the RAM is kind of interesting, actually. First, because I have completely two different types of RAM here, and you wouldn't do that these days. And I added these heat sinks, Thermaltake heat sinks, which was because I was overclocking, and no components at that time were really made for that. These days, a lot of components, from CPUs to RAM and anything else, they're actually made to be overclocked. So, you can do it with just whatever they come with stock, and a lot of RAM sticks these days come with heatsink stock, but these did not. I added these myself. I actually think they look kind of snazzy, but it is two different RAM sticks. This is 256 megabytes each, so I had 512 megs total in this machine. By the way, just to interject here about these fans, I was wrong. These are actually Cooler Master fans, so not a cheap Chinese no-name. These are name brand fans. Not bad fans. Now up here for the CPU, this is a Thermaltake cooler on top of an AMD Athlon XP 1700 Plus. I don't remember in any way how to get that off, but I will be taking that off so you can get a good look at that. Fan is off, so let's take a look at this heatsink. And it's clipped on, so I'll probably have to get a screwdriver and unclip that. So I decided there's basically no way to get this clip off while it's in the case. I'm going to take the motherboard out and try it that way. So hopefully this comes out. Oh, I missed one screw. And yes, I'm not being too careful with this. By the way, it's an 8-bit KT7A. And now I remember that, and I do remember buying it on purpose because it was a very well-regarded board. As you can see, AGP slot, 4, 5, 6 PCI slots, and 1 ISA slot. These last two are shared, but that was quite a lot of slots in those days. Still is today. And 3 RAM slots. So I don't remember what CPUs it supported up to, but faster than I have here anyway. Let's try and get this heatsink off and take a look at that CPU under there. So not sure if you can really see this mechanism, but this is the clip. It's just got a little peg there that it's clipped onto, and you just got to push it down really hard to get that off. I do remember these things were a pain in the ass, and they still are. But let's go ahead and try and do it. And with the board out of the case, no problem at all. There's your heatsink. Little dollop of Arctic silver grease on there. And the CPU. Let's get that cleaned up a little bit so you can see that better. And there it is. AMD Athlon 1700 Plus. Okay, so last thing to talk about is the drives. I'll just remove all these now. I may not actually remove the floppy drive and that fan controller, I'm not sure. Just to talk a little bit about this. Some of you may actually use one of these, but I bet a lot of you don't even know what this is. Let me just get in a little closer here. I'll show you one of the photos I took earlier as well. So it's obviously no longer hooked up, so it's not showing anything on the screen, but in the photo you would have seen that shows both the CPU and main system temp as well as the RPMs of 2 of the fans. And this particular fan controller, sorry about the dust, it is quite old, but this was fully manual, and you would just simply turn the knobs to adjust the fans whenever you wanted that little extra performance. Just crank up the fans. Obviously it was a trade-off between noise and cooling, but that's why I got it, so I could play games and have everything cranked up to the max. And then when I wanted to just do some word processing or something and I wanted some quiet, just turn them back down. You can still get fan controllers. A lot of systems still have them, and some people do like to build their systems with these. Most of them these days have automatic fan control in addition to the knobs. In fact, maybe they all do, I don't know. So anyway, yeah, that's that. Now I will go ahead and remove the other drives. The hard drive in here, you can see it's not held in with anything, and that's because I just put it back in. This was actually sitting in a wicker basket. Let's see if you can see this. It's marked trash, and I had meant to throw it out. I actually had wiped this drive completely, and I had to reinstall Windows in order to show you all this stuff. But I had meant to take a sledgehammer to this thing because I, at one point, was so paranoid about my data. But obviously never did it, and I guess luckily that I hadn't. I ended up putting it back in here to show you this video. So maybe now I'll finally get to it. Who knows? As you can see, I've changed my mind. I am just taking everything out of this computer to show you, including the fan controller. What a mess. And that's the fan controller. Not much to it. More dust than anything at this point. Really simple device. You can actually put a hard drive in the fan controller so you don't waste a bay. Floppy drive, just a standard regular old floppy drive, Panasonic drive. I've actually been thinking of putting this in my modern PC, and I might still do that. They do make 5.25 to 3.5 inch adapters, so I may pick up one of those so I can fit it in one of my free bays. I do occasionally have need to use floppy disks, believe it or not. And last but not least, in terms of the drives, this is my Light-On CDRW drive. It's the LTR 5246S. I couldn't tell you what the speed of this thing is. Does it say on here anywhere? Nope. But it was playing fast enough for me at the time. And Light-On was, and maybe still is, I'm not sure, one of the better drive makers of that time. And just for completeness sake, let's see if we can get the power supply out of here. There it is. And it is an Antec 400 watt power supply. 400 watts smart power. Obviously no modular power in those days. This was how power supplies pretty much all were. Messy and kind of nasty, but this one was very reliable. So no complaints about it at all. So that is pretty much it, a complete teardown of my old PC. All these components here, this is pretty much all you need to build a PC, and maybe I'll even do another video specifically about building a PC, maybe the next time I actually upgrade my modern PC. Now, you may be wondering at this point if I plan to actually put all this back together, and the answer to that is, I don't know. Unlike my $20 laptop, which is also about 20 years old, that thing is actually pretty useful still. It plays 16-bit games. It does a few other things that my modern laptop actually can't. This desktop doesn't do anything that my current desktop can't do, and do a lot better. And it takes up a lot of space. So, you know, I don't know what I'm going to do. I may just put it in a pile in my basement somewhere. I may part it out for eBay, although none of this stuff is worth more than a couple bucks. Or I may put it back together, just for nostalgia's sake again. But it's very possible that this might be its swan song. So let's all just have a little moment of silence for this computer right now. And now that we've done that, I will be signing off. I hope you did enjoy this look at my previous daily driver computer that I used up until about 2002. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.